The sun had not yet risen that fateful morning. The vast skies over the northern isles were a murky shade of blue, and darkness still hung over the land. But in the pale glow of impending dawn, there rose a billow of black, swirling smoke. The harsh scent swept across the village, moments before ravenous red flames blanketed and consumed the households. A choir of shrieks and wails rose above the sound of the crackling flames. It was that morning that Kennedac experienced true chaos as the city was consumed in the blaze, and heavy falling boots marched across the ashes of the city. These memories, haunting her nightmares, jolted Rachel awake, and she thrashed upright, opening her eyes to find herself in her bedchamber in the fortress of Rekos, deep beneath the earth. And even as Rachel lay atop her bed and waited for the images from her nightmares to fade away with reality, the haunting smell of fire did not fade. It lingered in the air around her, filling her lungs and stinging her eyes with the rich earthy scent of blazing forest wood. It was a scent that had become engraved in her memory, and it caused her thoughts to dwell on the great tragedy her kingdom had suffered at the hands of the exiles. And as she breathed in the smoky air and her memories swirled about in her mind, her anger was rekindled. She raced toward the doors of her chamber and storming through the halls toward the strengthening scent of the nearby fire, all reason and restraint trailing behind her. And as she flung open the doors into the inner caverns, she could see the dancing red light reflecting off of the surface of the smooth blue lake. But as she drew nearer, her timidness began to creep back over her like a chill. There, beside the tower of red flames, sat the Dark Lord Dovain. He was silently reposed in one of the dining room chairs, and his head rested against the backing. A strand of his black hair, usually drawn back neatly off of his face, had fallen to hang just above the burn of exiles on his cheek. His eyes were closed and his tense jaw was eased, allowing his lips to part slightly with the silent breaths of the slumbering king. And at his feet was a sleek black beast, a wolf, with its head rested on its paws as it slept beside the fire. Rachel's steps grew softer as she drew near, her anger mellowing and her fear returning. The slow rise and fall of his chest assured her that Dovain was deep in sleep, but even still she could not help but feel intimidated by his presence. So, summoning what was left of her courage, she stood before him and put out her hand, tapping his muscular shoulder roughly enough to wake him. But she was unprepared for the consequences of his awakening, and stood helpless and stunned as his eyes shot open and his hands lashed out like snakes and clamped around her throat. With a bruising strength, his fingers drove into her neck, and she yelped in pain as his nails imprinted into the smooth flesh. Her frightened cry seemed to restore his senses, and he met her horrified gaze with a look of bewilderment. Disoriented, his grip slackened, but he did not release her, and he drew in a sharp breath as he gazed back into her eyes for a few moments before he warned, "Do not wake me again, princess. I cannot be responsible for the consequences." Rachel choked and pushed away his arms from her, clutching her neck tenderly and rubbing where his fingers had dug. When she had regained some of her voice, she hoarsely stated, "I wanted to speak to you." He motioned gently down to the chair where he had been sitting, withdrawing for a moment to retrieve another from the dining hall. In the short moments he was away, the wolf that had been lying at Dovain's feet lifted its head and stared at her. It did not growl or rise to confront her. It merely watched her with an expression of both curiosity and caution. And as Dovain returned, carrying one of the heavy-looking chairs over his shoulder in an effortless manner, the wolf stood up with its tail wagging and barked in a friendly way to greet his master. The Dark Lord placed the chair down on the rough stone floor of the cavern beside the other, waiting for Rachel to sit down before he also took his seat. As he did so, he patted the wolf's head and ran his nails along its coarse, glossy pelt. With a contented tail wag, the creature rested down at his feet, enjoying the safety of his master's side and the warmth of the nearby fire. Dovain, as he pet the creature fondly, had been waiting for the princess to speak, since she had been bold enough to wake him to do so. He eyed the ring about her throat where his grip had nearly strangled her. Short red lines showed where his nails had driven into the skin, and he felt an odd sensation of guilt for injuring her. It had been a long time since he had felt guilt. Rachel had been watching him silently, studying him and trying to decide many things in her mind. And in the silence, his mind began to wander. His eyes drifted to the roaring blaze beside them, and he began to think about the princess's kingdom, which had burned to the ground. And he knew that this must too be what she was thinking about, and probably what she had wakened him to talk about. He lifted his head slightly, not looking at anything in particular, just moving enough to draw her attention as he said softly, "Earlier last evening I had been hunting on the surface, and during that time I found my way to the edge of the forest and spotted the ruins of your marketplace. I discovered some of your subjects, survivors of the fire I assume, huddled together in a crumbling structure among the remains." Rachel's eyes narrowed and she could feel some of her anger returning as she gritted her teeth and asked, "What did you do to them?" Dovain looked at her with a confused expression. "I have done nothing to them. I simply stated that I have discovered some of your subjects still alive. I thought you would be pleased. What should I have done to them?" He asked in an animated tone, tossing his hands up and shaking his head. "What else could I expect but for you to slaughter them as carelessly as you did when you set fire to their homes?" She hissed back, her lips drawing back into a snarl as she finally burst out with the accusation. The emotion vanished from his face, his eyes practically blazing as his hands began to shake, and he bellowed, "I did not set that fire." She crossed her arms and did not back down under his fury. "Salvador said it, but he is your servant. I have seen the way he serves you without question. Surely you must have known of his intentions." In a half-whisper, still shaking in short convulsions, he said, "I did not. Not until the deed was already done did Salvador bring the fires to my attention. I do not approve of his actions, but I cannot undo what has been done. So do not rebuke me for another man's actions. I tire greatly of your accusations, princess." "My people," she said in a trembling voice, "suffered an incomprehensible loss at Salvador's hands. Perhaps the fault may not lie with you, but the solution may. Your men, the exiles, they follow your every command. They will listen to you. That is why I beg for your help." She began, surprised to hear the change in herself. "Call off Salvador's men and end the attack on Kennedac so that my people may be left in peace. Salvador has his prize, so let the destruction end." "That, my dear," he said in a calmer voice, "has been my intention since I first learned of the attack on your people. And your being here is an unexpected expediency, since I too have matters to discuss." As he said this, Dovain rose from his chair and drew near to the fire, keeping his back to her as he spoke in a voice just above a hush. "I have a proposition for you." And Rachel watched as the flickering red glow danced about him as he stood in the firelight, his cloak draping from his broad shoulders and fluttering with the powerful heat of the flames. And she wondered in utter bafflement what Dovain could be scheming, patient for him to continue, waiting silently to hear the Dark Lord's most unusual proposition.